this is the first installment in 2023. This is the lending question and answer. We also do a deposit one in a few months. A few months after that, we'll do a Bank Secrecy Act anti-money laundering. And we finish off with a special one at the end of the year that is a look back on what lies ahead. Today's focus, like I said, is going to be lending compliance questions and answers. My name is Jared Moyer, and I'm going to be kind of the lead presenter today. But I've got a lot of help that's going to help me out today. I've got a few teammates that are going to be along for the ride. Kyla Kroger's working behind the scenes. She's going to be taking care of you through the chat function. If you have trouble with audio, visual, if you don't have a link to the official material, which is really some blank pages to take some notes, she's going to help you out. You can communicate with her using the chat function. My teammate, Diane Dean, she's going to be playing the important role of moderator today. There's Diane coming on in here. She's going to be the key to getting the questions to me so we can answer them in plain English during the program today. So many of you took advantage of the opportunity to pre-submit questions. Thank you for doing so. By the way, if you didn't know, you can do that with all of our webinars. You can pre-submit your questions. And with our webinars, we answer every single one of them in writing, as well as trying to get to as many as we can orally during the program. During today's program, we're going to take as many as we can orally during the program, and we got 1 hour to do that here, so I'm going to try to speed through some of the housekeeping here, but Diane's the key to that. If you want to submit a question for consideration today, the Q&A button in the Zoom control panel is how you get those to Diane. Like I said, we'll get as many plain English answers as we can out the door during our 1 hour program. Like I said, the materials through the chat function there. With that, I'm going to actually turn off the slides here because really the show is Diane and I going through your questions and trying to provide those answers during the program. So bear with me just 1 second here. There we go. Diane, I think with that, I'm going to throw the baton over to you. You kind of control the show here today. So the floor is yours. Let's take the questions.
Okay, we will start off with one on truth in lending. In the past, when we'd renew or refinance a consumer real estate loan to a higher interest rate, we'd have to provide a new truth in lending disclosure because of the increased APR and fees. Is this still a true process?
Okay, so you can do a lot of things without having to provide new disclosures. And I'll just say generally, but let's do this. That question used the word renewal, and that's a word that's just going to get you in trouble. What we have to come back to is this. Are we doing a refinance where we take loan A and we tear it up and replace it with loan B, a new legal obligation? Or are we taking what is currently loan A and attaching something to it? Modification. If we're doing modifications where we take loan A and attach something to it and loan A doesn't get torn up and thrown away, it still exists, then there's a lot of exceptions for not having to give new disclosures. But some of the areas where you would, if you go from fixed to variable, if you go from open end to closed end or vice versa, that's going to trigger new disclosures. The key thing to me, though, to start with this is make sure we're using the correct term. Are we doing a modification? Because that would be a loophole for a lot of ways to get around having to provide new disclosures. Or are we doing a refinance, which is going to trigger disclosures in most cases?
Moving on to HMDA, if an applicant or borrower is a trust, how do we report demographic information?
So HMDA actually gives us this answer in the regulation and the commentary. And so if a trust is going to be your applicant, then you do not collect demographic information on that trust. You would report not applicable.
Okay, moving on to flood. How should flood insurance be calculated on a structure with 2 units that are attached, such as a duplex? Each unit has its own legal description that includes building site A or building site B. Should the policy show both units? The policy also currently states there is only 1 unit. Should it list 2?
Okay, so based on the information provided, it appears to me that we have 2 buildings that share a common wall. You mentioned duplex, you mentioned 2 different legal descriptions. Now, the ultimate answer to this question is going to be provided by the insurance agent because they're the ones that make up the rules and define what the property is and isn't. Now, it needs to be a good, reputable agent. There's a lot of agents out there that really don't understand flood insurance and they may take you down a wrong path. But I've been down this road a lot of times with a similar example. And traditionally, it's looked at as 2 different dwellings, which means $250,000 for each unit. So you've got this what looks like 1 building with a common wall. It's going to be $250,000 for the left-hand side, $250,000 for the right-hand side, 2 separate policies. Now, if you're only taking one side, then you'll have 1 policy. The max available will be $250,000. Now, if the insurable value is less than that, that'll have to be taken into account along with the loan amount of when we do that lesser of calculation.
What are the allowable origination fees for consumer loans?
Okay, so allowable. I mean, that's a really wide open question as far as the without being real specific there in maybe giving me some examples. There are lots of things that could fit into that origination fee definition. It's a pure profit description. If you go into truth in lending, the key would be is their finance charges. So you can charge origination fees, their pure profit fees, their finance charges. I guess without being more specific, I can't give much more feedback than that on that one.
Under TRID, using a standard closing disclosure, how should proceeds appear in the calculating cash to close table for a construction to perm single transaction loan?
So again, without having a visual for all of you to look at one of these tables and going through the examples, what I could tell you is in that cash to close table, we use the primary CD or LE for that matter, the funds to and from, then there's two different sections for those. That's where that would be factored into the calculations. It's not going to specifically say, construction funds, but it would be funds that were included within that calculation within those sections, funds to and funds from the borrower, respectively.
For HMDA, what actions do you recommend when we find errors while scrubbing our LAR prior to submission?
Fix them. I mean, if you find errors, we should fix them. Now, let me do this. Let's say that early, so if we look back at 2022, we're getting ready to submit that by, in 2023. Let's say we found an error in early 2022 with respect to action taken. Maybe we marked it as withdrawn and we didn't send an adverse action notice, but we see that it should be denied or incomplete or something like that. I don't know that I necessarily would go back and send the letter that far out. I mean, you're almost a year past that time frame, but you need to get it right on your LAR. So maybe you create the document, note the error that this is what should have went out so you get it reported correctly. I don't know that I'd go and send it to the customer if I'm more than a year out. They likely know they were denied, or it's going to be confusing from the customer standpoint if you actually send that out at that point.
For TRID, if we collect for inspection and handling fees on construction to perm loans after closing and the amount increases from what was disclosed, can we pass this increase along to the borrower? And do we need to redisclose? And also, does it need to be in connection with a valid change circumstance?
Okay, there's a lot to unwrap there. So let's start with the regulation. The regulation is not as crystal clear as we'd like it to be on this. They do mention it, but the small entity compliance guide that the CFPB put out has some good information on this topic in there. And essentially, if you are basing the what you anticipate charging based on prior experiences, any overages, provided that the best guess was in good faith, are not going to be something you're going to be held to a tolerance on. So as long as you're putting a good faith effort into what you believe the fees will be based on past experiences, an overage that is a one-off here and there that was not done outside of good faith will not be a problem for you, will not be a tolerance issue.
Should we be ordering a flood determination prior to issuing a loan estimate? If we wait until we receive the intent to proceed to order a determination, is finding out the property is in a special flood hazard area a valid change circumstance?
So it's up to you when you want to pull the flood determination, as long as it's done before closing. Now, let me expand on that. We encourage you to pull that flood determination early on in the loan application process. Does it have to be done before the loan estimate's been provided and intent to proceed received? No, it does not. The earlier you do it, the better your disclosures are going to be, though. If I wait until after I provide my loan estimate to pull the flood determination, and then I find out it's in a 100-year floodplain, which will require insurance, then that wouldn't have been disclosed on the loan estimate. Now, because of when we pulled it, it's not a changed circumstance. You see, flood insurance is one of those things that lands outside of the 0 and the 10% tolerance. It's an unlimited tolerance provided the previous or the most recent loan estimate was made in good faith. So if you've provided a loan estimate, then do a flood determination, find out it requires flood insurance, there's no requirement to do an updated loan estimate at that point because it's an unlimited tolerance. If you have to redisclose for some other purpose, then you would need to add the flood insurance in at that point. but by itself would not be a changed circumstance, not be a tolerance item, provided everything meets the good faith standard.
Under HMDA, are all bridge loans exempt? If the bridge loan will not be refinanced into permanent financing, is it reportable?
I think that's one of the big misconceptions about bridge loans. And if some of you have been around long enough, you know where I'm going to go with this. Old rules, okay, out the door, construction and bridge were just exempt. And that went by the wayside. That's not the case anymore. So now we have to look at things like bridge loans and even construction loans in the same breath that HMDA says that there's an exclusion for temporary financing. Hey, what's that mean? There's got to be two phases. There's the temporary phase followed by whatever comes next. If we do a bridge only, hey, that's not temporary anymore. That's the only financing that's ever going to be. Then bridge only in that scenario gets reported, just like construction only. If there's only ever going to be a construction loan, and when construction's done, I'm going to pay you off in cash, construction loan even gets reported. So a bridge where we're waiting for something to sell, and then when it sells, it's going to be paid off in full, and there won't be subsequent financing, bridge only gets reported in that scenario.
We have a few questions looking for updates on 1071. Do you have any updates on when the final rule will be issued and any resources?
Well, I've got a couple things for you here. So let me give you the update, and then I got something cool I want to share, and I'm going to ask for a little participation from the crowd here in just a moment. But let me give you the update. So the CFPB put out their fall 2022 rulemaking agenda. That sounds weird to say because we're sitting here in 2023, but that's how they do this thing. And there's about 10 different things on there. I want to say 4 or 6 of them were existing. I'm not sure what the order there was, but one of the existing items was the 1071 rulemaking, and the CFPB is under court order to get that rule finalized and out the door by the end of March. Now, that's what everybody was anticipating anyway, so that's probably not news to everyone listening. But what was interesting in the read of the rulemaking agenda is it said they may have a rule out by the end of January, the month that we're looking that's going to end right around the corner. So I don't know about you. I've been working ahead trying to get things done in case that thing drops before the end of the month so we can bring plain English to all of you in a short time thereafter. I every morning I go and do the Google search and I haven't seen it yet. So it could be out by the end of the month, but no later than March of this year. So it's going to be right around the corner either way. I know many of you are asking about what's the runway out for that thing going to look like? The proposal mentioned this 18-month runway to get ready. And I know that sounds like a lot of time, but in compliance time, we all know that's not a lot of time. And I'm going to break it down for you just a little bit here. If we get it by the end of March, right, that's going to be 21 months before. If we do that, 21 months would bring us to January of 25, right? January 1st, 2025. That's more than the 18-month they mentioned in the proposal. Now, I'm just crystal balling this, right? So let's just think about that. Let's say we get it by the end of March. That gives us 9 months through the end of this year. You're going to want to do all you can in those 9 months if we're looking at January 1st, 2025, because based on the proposal, again, if the final rule changes, but based on the proposal, they mentioned a 12-month practice run. That 12-month practice run would then be 2024. And you're going to want to take full advantage of that, as much of it as you can, to collect race, sex, ethnicity under these rules via the practice year. Now, you might say, well, gosh, we'll do 9 months, 8 months, 7 months, whatever. You want to take as much time as you can, though, to do that practice run. So there's a lot to do in really a short amount of time, even though 18 months, 21 months, whatever that seems like, seems longer than it really is. Now, our team has been working on this and trying to figure out, all right, what can we do to help you out? Obviously, we're going to be bringing things to you through our magazine, through our monthly connection. We're going to be putting webinars together. We'll do here's what it looks like at the outset. We'll do things for the front line. We'll do things for processors. All those things are spinning around in our heads. But one of the things that we thought of just in the last couple of weeks that we're looking to see if there's interest. I'm going to do a poll question here. Give me a moment to get it up and running here, and then I'll explain it. So I'm going to launch this, and you guys can chime in here in a moment, and I'll share the results. But here's the question. We're thinking about putting together a 1071 thought leadership implementation and planning group. The pie in the sky idea is this. Monthly, we would get together, BCC, Bankers Compliance Consulting, would facilitate, and we'd share information together. We'd have an agenda, and we'd learn from one another over the course of the next, I really see this as maybe a 3-4 year thing. where once a month we'd get together and learn from each other. You put together your draft of what you think the commercial loan application might look like, and we share it with one another. This isn't meant to be competitive. What I need from you is, would you be interested in a subscription membership in a group like that got together once a month, virtually, shared ideas, and really tried to expedite and make more efficient this implementation and planning of 1071 once we get the final rule. And maybe, if we get enough people together, we can start earlier on than that as well. So I'll give you just a few more moments here. We've got about half of you responding, and it's coming in feverishly here. But just a simple yes, no, as to whether or not you'd have interest in being a member of a group like that. With that, Diane, I'm going to throw it back to you. Let's get to some more questions. I'll leave that poll up, and we'll continue to have some people chime in on that, and I'll close it out here in just a bit.
Okay, we'll move on to Regulation B, since we were talking about 1071. Is the appraisal notice required for a pre-qualification when no property has yet been identified?
Yeah, so if you go to Regulation B, it says an application that is to be secured by a 1 to 4 family first lien. And I'm going to change the wording just a little bit there. Is or will be secured. And so pre-qualifications are applications in certain circumstances. So my answer is yes, the appraisal notice and free copy would apply to those pre-qualification / pre-approval applications.
Is there such a thing as a pre-qual for a refinance, since there is a property address?
We've debated that before, and the answer is no. We don't believe that there is such a thing. And usually it's coming from the TRID perspective. That's not something that we believe is there. And I know the CFPB chimed in on this as well when they rolled TRID out. One of those, what were those things we listened to? They put out these not bulletins, the webinars they did, Diane. Anyway, they put this information out, and I know they referenced it in one of those.
Under TRID, if an applicant wants to buy a bigger home with a loan secured by both their current and new home, can we do this as one loan, or would it be better to have two? And what do we need to consider if we do this as one loan secured by both properties?
So we'll just take that avenue on this. So if we're going to do one loan secured by both properties, and let's just look at it from a TRID perspective. From a TRID perspective, you'd have to account for both properties when you do your taxes, insurance, assessments, and any other fees that would be affected by the fact that you're taking both homes as collateral. From a HMDA perspective, if this is a HMDA reportable transaction and doesn't meet one of the exemptions, then for all but 7 of the reportable data fields, you would have to look at all the properties secured in the loan, so both. But for 7 of the data points, you would have to pick one of the 2 and use that as the property for reporting those pieces of information. I'm going to end this poll, by the way. It looks like we've kind of have everybody that has chimed in. Looks like roughly 62% of you said, yep, I'd have interest. Another 38 said, yeah, not so sure. We'll let you know where we move with that. We're going to take that information, and you'll be hearing from us soon.
Are we required to have a formal procedure to handle reconsideration of value requests from mortgage customers? And how formal should it be?
So this is one of the pieces of information, I don't know how else to describe it, best practices maybe, and I don't know how best practice it really is because I don't know a lot of banks that are actually doing this. So that kind of answers part of it. But this is something the CFPB put out in light of fair lending and the whole initiative with appraisals and a bias being associated with them that really took on a life of its own in 2022, and it will continue. There's a thing called the PAVE initiative out there that they're going to reform the appraisal industry. So one of the things they put out as part of the information on this was, hey, banks, you should be considering your process if somebody wants to ask for the appraisal to be reconsidered. Nothing in Reg B, nothing in any other regulation requires you to do this. It's simply a CFPB best practice. So if you go out and you Google that reconsideration of value in CFPB, you can see the bulletin that they put out on that. It's not required. It's something to think about and have as a best practice. I'm certain that informally banks would handle this and do handle this. I don't know of many banks that I've met that actually have a formal process at this point. That said, if you do something in this area, make sure you're consistent from one borrower to the next. Inconsistencies will cause a potential for fair lending risk.
And as a follow up, they ask about adding additional disclosures and in small banks, keeping the process independent of the lending and appraisal functions.
So there's no requirement for any sort of disclosure. Now, that said, if you are going to allow this to occur, you need to make sure people are aware so that we have consistency that is able to occur. The independence issues in a smaller bank where there's less appraisers and the whole appraisal independence rules that reside in both Reg Z and safety and soundness rules out there, yes, all of that would have to be accounted for in how you go about doing this.
On a home equity loan where the file notes state the loan is to purchase other property or purchase investment property, should it be categorized as other or home purchase under HMDA?
So if I heard you right, I wrote down, you said it to the loan might be to purchase other property or purchase investment property. So HMDA, the purpose goes in a waterfall order. We go purchase, refinance, home improvement, other. If it looks, walks, and talks like purchase, and it only has to be $1, right? It's not the most wins, but if any of the proceeds are used for purchase, as it sounds like in this scenario, it's purchase. You don't even make it to other.
And staying with HMDA, what constitutes a cash out refinancing?
So this was a little confusing when HMDA was rewritten because the code is 31 and 32. Now in the hierarchy, refinance comes second, but in the coding, it's not 2 like it should be, and it's not even 3, it's 31 or 32. Well, determining which code you use for the refinance or cash out refinance, it really depends on whether or not you, or if there's an investor involved, treats from an underwriting and pricing perspective the transaction differently between what might be just a straight cash out refi or a non-cash out refi. So if you treat them differently, then you have to differentiate between the two different codes, split hairs, if you will. If you treat them all the same way, whether it's cash out or not, versus a traditional refinance, then they're all the same code. The regulation doesn't make the definition of what it is or is not. It's just if you handle them differently, then you got to code them differently.
And for HMDA, if there are no notes in a file regarding what the funds are for, such as to purchase a dwelling or to improve a home, do we classify these as other, or do we need something in the file stating where the funds are going?
Well, from a credit standpoint, you should know what the loan proceeds are being utilized for. So I think you start with that. If there's nothing that indicates that it's purchase, refinance, or improvement, and it's consumer purpose, it more than likely falls into the other category. If it's business purpose, not purchase, not refinance, not home improvement, and that there is no other for business purpose home equity. So it might not be reportable from a business standpoint if it's not purchase, refinance, or improvement. So if it doesn't meet one of those three, it wouldn't be reportable for business, but for consumer, it would be. So it depends on the type of transaction. I think you'd want to get a little more information about what the funds are for, though.
For Regulation B, what is the best practice for determining a completed application for a 30-day decision?
So from a Reg B standpoint, our recommendation would be, so obviously you have the oral or written request for credit. That's the application. As far as when the 30-day clock starts, it's when you have all the information that you would normally and readily consider for that type of transaction and are able to make a credit decision. So if you have everything you need, or maybe you don't have everything you normally would have, but you have enough to say, yes, that's going to start your 30-day clock. So when you have everything you need, and I would say based on verification documents, hey, there is an opportunity for you to call it complete without verification documents. I wouldn't. It's going to mess with HMDA for those of you that are HMDA banks. So I'd say when we have everything that we would normally and regularly consider, and we have all the verification documents, then we would call it complete. That's what would start the 30-day clock and require us to communicate that decision within that time frame.
Back to truth in lending, when a lender allows HELOCs for the purchase of a primary residence, how should a lender handle right of rescission for future draws?
Okay, so from a truth in lending standpoint, if Diane is going to use a home equity line of credit to buy her new house, which will be her primary residence, that initial advance is going to be exempt. Now, the loan is secured by the new one, by the way. If we were using an existing home that was her primary, that changes things. So we're going to give her a home equity line on her new house secured by her new house. The initial advance that is purchase money would not be subject to right of rescission. It's going to meet the exceptions within truth in lending. However, we are going to do right of rescission upfront, okay, for all future advances. So we're going to let the money for purchase walk out the door immediately, but no other advances will be done until after the rescission period ends for the rescission timeframe the rescission paperwork and timeframe that we provide in connection with that transaction at closing. So we'll let the initial advance walk out the door, but no subsequent advances until we exercise the right of rescission, which means the notice, material disclosures, and then the 3 full days have passed before we advance funds beyond that. And then that rescission up front that we did will work for all future advances. If we don't do it that way, then what happens is each subsequent advance would require its own independent rescission. So every time Diane wants money, we got to go through a whole new right of rescission period. That's not what we want to do. We'll do it up front for all future advances.
Under TRID, are banks being cited for listing the title insurance policy under the attorney name on the service provider list? Attorneys typically choose the title insurance, and those can vary and change.
Well, I think we need to do some more homework here. So why is there an attorney involved? The attorney is likely your closing agent, and you probably are doing a required closing agent in most cases. So that's fine. The attorney is going to be listed as the closing agent and likely on your shopping list as your shoppable service provider. But the attorney is not the title insurance provider. There's a title insurance company that you're letting the attorney pick in this particular instance, which means you need to do your homework on the attorney and the title companies they may be picking, and you need to put the name of who you think they're going to use and the dollar amount associated with that. We should not be putting the attorney down as the one that's providing the title insurance, because they are not. You're going to have missed having done your homework. I'm going to question how you got the estimate that you got in the first place without padding it, because it's just not going to meet the good faith standard. So we need more information, more homework to be included or to be completed before we can include a good faith estimate of what those dollar amounts are and to whom they're going to be payable towards.
What are your thoughts on using a personal financial statement as a credit application? If we consider this a credit request, we should not reuse it for more than one request, correct?
So my opinion is it's a bad idea. Now, can you utilize so if this is my personal financial statement with my wife and I's information, could I drop this off in connection with a request for credit? Certainly, but you still need to get intent to apply, and the financial statement itself does not work for that. You could have a separate line or a separate area where we indicate intent to apply, and that would be okay one time. You wouldn't be able to reutilize this personal financial statement as an application for a subsequent request. So I think it's an all-around bad idea. Let the personal financial statement stand on its own. It's a verification document of assets and things like that. Make the request for credit be something different. The intent to apply be something different. So not that it can't be done, but I think it's going to cause you more trouble in the long run.
What do we do if we realize we collected demographic information in error? For example, a business purpose loan that we thought was a refinance, but it only paid down a different dwelling secured loan.
Well, you're in luck, really. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act, and I know some of you thinking, well, we're a HMDA bank. No, listen to me, hear me out here. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act gives you an out based on the HMDA rule, okay, as it relates to business purpose home equity, because sometimes somebody comes in and we don't know exactly what the collateral is. We think it looks like it might be HMDA, and so we collect it, and then we find out it's not HMDA because it's not purchase, refinance, or home improvement. So there is a place in Reg B that gives you an out there. I don't have the citation off the top of my head, but there's an exception there for you to collect in those scenarios where it looks like it may or may not be HMDA, or like it could be HMDA. And then if you collected and it doesn't end up being HMDA, you're okay.
Is a commercial or business revolving line of credit to purchase investment properties HMDA reportable if we're not an open-end reporter? In other words, does the exception threshold to report open-end lines apply to business purpose loans when refinancing, purchasing, or improving a dwelling?
So make sure I got this right. The bank is not an open-end reporter. Is that what I'm hearing if I read through the lines? So they're not an open-end reporter, but they've got a commercial open-end line of credit that's dwelling secured and would otherwise look like it. If you're not an open-end reporter, you don't report consumer or business open-end lines of credit. So consumer, commercial doesn't matter. If you're not an open-end reporter, you don't report any of them.
Can you explain what a qualified mortgage is under Regulation Z?
Well, I'll give you the short version here. So here's the cool part. We have a webinar, just like a lot of these answers. I'm going to maybe go off on a tangent here. A lot of these questions that are coming in that Diane's asking, I'm giving you just the answer, right? Trying to give you a plain English short answer so we can get as many as we can in here today. If you are hungry for more, we've got a whole library full of training material on many of these topics. And this question here really helps me explain this. The question, can you explain what a qualified mortgage loan is? I do a 2-hour webinar on this. So I'm going to give you the 30-second answer here in just a minute. But there's a lot that goes into a lot of these answers that there's a lot more on that if you're hungry for more, that I encourage you to go check out our library of on-demand and upcoming live events. Now, back to the question. The qualified mortgage tag, if you will, is about civil liability risk protection. And so there's different types of mortgages. There's qualified and there's non-qualified mortgages. And then the qualified mortgages actually can get put into different buckets with varying degrees of risk. And so the short answer is simply it's the amount of risk that you're willing to take on based on the underwriting and verification and loan product requirements and restrictions according to the terms and conditions. All of that, the outcome is going to be, you might have a qualified mortgage that if you go to court and somebody tries to say you screwed up, you just win. And if it's a non-QM, you're going to have to demonstrate that you made the best decision and that the product met certain requirements and didn't include certain things. So it's a civil liability risk protection. I'll just kind of leave it at that. If you want to know more, we've got an entire 2-hour webinar on it.
What fees are and are not included in the APR calculation?
So Truth in Lending Act Regulation Z is the regulation here. So I'm going to go real general here. The general answer is going to be the fees that are not finance charges are typically those that are payable in a comparable cash transaction. In other words, if I had to go pay cash and the same fee applied whether I had cash to pay for it as opposed to a loan, then it's not a finance charge. Now, there are exceptions out there. And so that's the general rule. There's an entire large section within Regulation Z that gets into the ifs, ands, and buts. And whether it's a real estate loan makes a difference as opposed to a non-real estate loan. And so there's a lot of different qualifiers, criteria there that we would have to open up. And that in and of itself is probably an hour conversation.
When we generate a loan payoff escrow statement, are we required to include the prior year's projections?
So think of escrows, RESPA. If we're talking about a loan that's paying off, you have to close out the escrow account. So what we look to is the short year statement requirements. However, you're not going to fully comply with the short year statement. So the short year statement is 3 things. We're going to provide you the projection, the history. So the projection for the coming year, the history, and then we're going to provide you the projection for the next year, right? In a loan payoff scenario, they're going to provide you the last projection and the history. They won't give you a projection for the next year. So you're still going to get 2 things in a loan payoff scenario. You can't just give them what happened. You have to give them what you told them was going to happen so they can compare it to what actually happened.
If a co-borrower is removed from a mortgage loan application for credit reasons, does that application need to be denied and a new application started with just the main borrower?
That's the way we would treat it. It's cleaner, especially for things like TRID and HMDA. So send out an adverse action notice. If you got 2 applicants, you could, in theory, under Reg B, just deny the primary. But if credit reports are involved, then everybody gets an adverse action notice. So the best thing to do is just send out your adverse action notices, start over. If you're talking about HMDA, you'll have 2 different entries, the old one and the new one moving forward.
For HELOCs, should the rate set date be the date an underwriter approves the loan if in fact they qualify the borrower at a different rate?
I guess my answer is yes. If the underwriter is resetting the rate, then that's the date the rate was set, the most recent date the rate was set.
Under TRID, when allowing a customer to shop with fees listed in Section C of the loan estimate, does the service provider list have to match the fees exactly as listed in Section C of the loan estimate? If we use a blanket service provider list, is that sufficient or should it be specific to each loan estimate?
Well, I think there's 2 different things there. So the first part was, do the fees need to match up? Yes, because the the applicant needs to be able to compare what's on the loan estimate to the shopping list and be able to determine that these things go together. In other words, if I've got a survey that I'm listing, that the survey provider goes with the survey that's listed on my loan estimate and ultimately my closing disclosure. So they should be similar. Okay, now, if there's a small insignificant difference, I suppose you're given a little bit of grace there, but why not make them be exact? When things don't look alike, it's going to cause you problems in your next audit, your next exam. Now, if we've got a title company listed and there's, let's say, 3 or 4 things that title company does, can we just list the title company once? Yes. You don't have to list the same company that's offering multiple services multiple times. The last part of that question, if I remember right, was can we use a canned service provider list for all transactions? No, they have to be transaction specific. Now, could you have a list that you can provide to most of the people most of the time? Yeah, for people that are interested in a 1 to 4 family transaction in your traditional lending area that's a traditional home, you probably can give the same list to just about everyone. But what happens when the details of the transaction differ just a little bit, or maybe even a lot, and that provider no longer works? Let me give you an example. So let's say that our borrower's living in Omaha, Nebraska. They're buying a property in Florida, and the bank is located in Omaha, Nebraska. And so now we have an Omaha, Nebraska-based list that has a survey provider that's good for the whole state of Nebraska. Let's just assume that. And we're going to require a survey with this vacation home for our borrower in Florida. Can we use the Omaha or Nebraska-based survey provider for the property in Florida? Probably not, because they're not licensed there and aren't able to provide the service in connection with the transaction. So in that scenario, if we're going to let them shop for a survey for that Florida property, we have to provide a transaction-specific shopping list. So you can use the same list a lot of the time, but you can't use the same list 100% of the time. And if you are trying to do that, then you're just going to make it the mission of some examiner to prove you wrong in some scenario. So I think it's best to prepare yourself to be able to do it on a transaction by transaction basis.
When denying a TRID-covered application within the first 3 business days, do we need to send an ECOA notice along with the adverse action notice?
So, it was great that they put the Reg B appraisal notice on the loan estimate. The problem is it created a lot of false security, because the only way the TRID loan estimate works for complying with the ECOA appraisal notice is if your Reg B application date and your TRID application date are the same date. Now, you might say, well, a lot of our transaction, that is the case. But again, not 100% of them. If I come in today and I haven't identified a property yet, but I have a Reg B application that is or will be secured by a 1 to 4 family first lien, 3 days later, my ECOA notice has to go out about the appraisal. But I might not get the 6th item for TRID until next week. So it's great that it's on there. And when it works, fine. Then I don't have to do a Reg B standalone. But if I don't have my TRID 6 items yet, but I have a Reg B request for credit, 3 days later, that notice has to go out if it is or will be secured by a 1 to 4 family first lien on a dwelling.
For HMDA, if there is a promotion with an introductory teaser rate and the loan is approved but not accepted, is it correct to report the introductory rate?
Required, yes.
When asking for demographic information, our vendor will only complete the boxes asking if the race, sex, and ethnicity of the applicant was collected in person on applications taken face-to-face. Since these boxes are otherwise blank, is it okay to continue to report not collected for HMDA when the application is taken another way?
The answer is yes, and the CFPB clarified this through some Q&As. NA would also be available for use in that scenario. So you might have a system or a software giving you a validity at it, even though it's something that the CFPB is okayed.
For TRID, can we label discount points as origination points to meet state law or loan program restrictions on discount points?
I tell you, in this rate environment that we're in, which is much different than last 15 years, 20 years maybe, the rising and the speed at which we're rising. A lot of these rules didn't exist. The points and fees thresholds, the HPML rules, the high cost mortgage rules, and all these different rate thresholds, right? None of those were in existence last time we had a rate environment like this. What's happened? We've taken a ton of calls from people just like you saying, Well, I've gone over my points and fees threshold, so can I manipulate it? Well, there's a whole can of worms that pops open when you start manipulating things like that. So first off, you can't play games with points and fees to make things work. You can't call them something else in order to not have them be a point and fee, because that's just not going to go good for you. If you're lowering points and fees on one transaction to the next to avoid things, that is an inconsistency that's just going to breed fair lending risk. And so there's a lot of things to be considered. This wasn't something that was talked about a lot when these rules came out, because again, the rate environment was completely different. And so today things are causing some problems in that area. So I'll go back to it. My answer is don't play games with points and fees. They are what they are. They need to be disclosed. And if you have to be underneath a threshold in order for it to meet a certain criteria, you need to find a way to be consistent from one application to the next rather than manipulating it based on one borrower to the next, which could be a fair lending issue.
Under RESPA, what are your thoughts on a service such as Rate Plug for co-marketing with realtors on property flyers for open houses and social media? The service is included in an annual charge for realtors, but we would pay monthly, so we're not able to clearly document a shared cost. Could we justify the cost by obtaining a valuation from a similar vendor and having an agreement signed by both parties to document the split?
So RESPA Section 8, that's the issue here, is hot, 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 hot. There were a couple different things that landed at the end of the year as far as enforcements. So this is definitely something that's on the radar of the regulatory agencies. When it comes to settlement services and the promotion, marketing of, referrals, things like that, it's looked at very closely. And yes, there's a fine line to being able to do certain things if costs are shared and it's fair market value, right? Here's the problem. This is subjective. And so you might do your market research and identify that the split cost is this and this. So this is what you feel your share is based on the value from your third party evaluator. And so you and this settlement service provider and a real estate agent or an attorney or whatever in this scenario, you say, all right, we're going to do this. And here's why we think it's okay. The examiner or the auditor that comes in next might say, I don't see it that way. And it doesn't matter that you've reached out to this third party. It's subjective, and we subjectively feel that it's not okay what you're doing. So there's a risk here in doing this. Now, that said, can you? Yes. You are assuming the risk based on the subjective view from a third party as to what you believe is acceptable in what you're paying for that service that's being provided. So document. Understand there's still going to be risk there, and they might flat out say that you can't do it, and you've been wrong in what you've been doing, or you may get a pass.
We have recently discovered a number of errors on our 2021 HMDA LAR and overall HMDA process. Is it better to self-identify the errors and resubmit, or wait and see what our regulator requires us to do?
Well, I think I'm going to start with it. It depends on when your next exam is. If you've got an exam right around the corner and they're going to be looking at HMDA and you've looked at HMDA and you found, let's just say you've got a listing of, a handful of errors, to correct them and resubmit right before your next exam, and then they find some errors and have to resubmit again, may not be worth it. You might just, hey, when they come in, hey, by the way, in preparing for you, we identified some things. I know you're going to be looking at HMDA, so we'd rather than, resubmit twice, we're going to wait and see if you have something, but know that we're going to resubmit these. Now, if you're far enough out from your next exam, then, make sure you've done all your due diligence to make sure you're aware that there aren't more of them. But then depending on how many there are, I would correct and resubmit. So self-identify is always a good thing. There's nothing bad about that.
Can you go over the definition of a TRID affiliate and how that impacts tolerances?
So the confusion is because we have a TRID affiliate and we have a RESPA affiliate. RESPA is 1% common ownership or control. So set that aside. That's really for the affiliated business arrangement disclosure rule, which not what this question's about. TRID references the term affiliate as well. And why? From a tolerance standpoint. If we have a TRID affiliate, okay, unless otherwise excluded, so like homeowners insurance agencies, they're excluded because they're under the unlimited tolerance, even if it's an affiliate under TRID. But from a TRID standpoint, it's a 0% tolerance if it's something associated with an affiliate, and that affiliate is defined as 25% common ownership or control. And now I'm using that common ownership and control wording. That's not what the regulation uses, but it's what we use in RESPA, and I think it's plain English, so it's going to help you with understanding it. The TRID rule does not explicitly define it. It actually looks to the Bank Holding Company Act rule, different law, and says, oh, we're going to use what they use, and it's 25% is the mark in the sand. So if you've got what I'll say 25% common ownership or control, and therefore have an affiliate by way of that relationship, then that's going to be a 0% tolerance from a TRID standpoint.
Are we required to list an affiliate insurance company on our shopping list? And would services by the insurance company be subject to a zero tolerance?
Well, this is good timing for this question based on the last one. So the insurance company for like hazard insurance is going to be outlined in the unlimited tolerance category, meaning we don't have to include them on a shopping provider list. But it's unlimited tolerance only if your estimate on the loan estimate is made in good faith. If it's not made in good faith, and you're just plucking numbers out of the sky, throwing darts at the wall to come up with these numbers, then that's going to move it from the unlimited category to the 0% category. So it doesn't have to be on the list. It's an unlimited tolerance unless you're deemed not to have estimated in good faith, which makes it a 0% tolerance.
We are implementing a process that will require documents be filed electronically at the county recorder's offices through an e-recording vendor. The vendor is charging us an annual fee and a per document fee. Can we pass on the annual fee charged to our bank to our customer?
So the one I'm familiar with is the per document fee, which is not necessarily what they're asking about, but we see that all the time. The annual fee, I have some concerns with that because that annual fee, if you were to split it up and just charge everybody, how do you know how much to charge each? So let's just say it's $1,000 annually. If I have, 10 applications, that's $100 per person. But what if I have 100 applications and it's only $10 per person? So there's a risk here in upcharging and overcharging and creating a RESPA Section 8 issue, similar to what we had earlier, right? So I'm concerned from that perspective. The other thing that concerns me about the annual fee, well, this is maybe be a way to say yes, not a concern. You could look to the TRID annual or average charge language. I have not specifically looked that up with this particular question, but there is a way in TRID to do average charges. There are some exclusions for things based on the property value, which I don't think this is. And there's two others, don't remember off the top of my head. But the concern there would be it has to be recalculated every 6 months, and any overage or under has to be carried forward to the next 6 month period. So a whole lot of moving parts there for something that's maybe not worth your time. What I maybe would suggest is you eat the annual fee, you charge the per document one, and you figure out what you maybe need to increase your origination charge to take on what you might be losing by not charging that annual fee to make up more profit, if you will, pure profit income.
Staying with this e-recording fee, would it be disclosed in fees you cannot shop for on the loan estimate and closing disclosure? And is it a finance charge?
So the e-recording fee would be a third-party service required by the lender where they're not allowed to shop. You're picking the provider. So it's going to go in Section B, which is going to make it a 0% tolerance.
If we keep an image of a borrower's driver's license, can it be stored in a folder underwriters could theoretically access? Or does it need to be in a location completely separate and locked from an underwriter?
So the concern here is fair lending, right? The Equal Credit Opportunity Act and prohibited basis factors that could be identified by way of the information on one's driver's license. So up until the 1071 proposal, outside of BSA AML, there really hasn't been anything written explicitly on what you should or can't do with driver's license. The answer is simply you're not to utilize them in any aspect of a credit decision making or of a credit transaction. So any aspect of a credit transaction. Not that you can't collect them, because we collect them all day for CIP and customer due diligence and things like that. We can do that. We can image them. We can share it. We can have them within our files, both paper and electronic. We're just not to utilize it for any aspect of the credit transaction. The questions are starting to come up like this one because of the proposal that is 1071 that, based on the way it's written right now, wants to put demographic information including information contained within the driver's license regarding demographics under lock and key from anybody that would have anyone that would be involved within the credit decision making process. So stay tuned on this one. I think we're going to see more discussion on this. And once we get 1071, it's probably going to open up the gates to potential changes in other regulations regarding this, like CIP, like current HMDA, current Reg B requirements, or where it doesn't say anything at all at this point, other than don't utilize it for illegal discrimination purposes.
How should the loan estimate and closing disclosure be completed when the loan borrowers are the trustees and the property is titled in the name of the trust? Specifically, the applicant name on the loan estimate, borrower name on the closing disclosure, and how should these documents be signed?
Well, I believe what I heard in the answer is that the borrowers are the trustees. So they would be individuals in that case, and so you'd list them as individuals, and then they would sign as individuals.
That new flood determination form, we have been questioned by our compliance officer if we have seen the new standard flood hazard determination form yet when pulling determinations, and we have not. Do you know when the new form is supposed to be used?
Okay, so the terrible communication on this, let's just start with that. In November of 2022, they put out that it was now officially available with all the little official numbers and everything on it. Through FEMA's website. There was no notification. You had to go out there and look for it, which we did periodically, and we found it towards the end of November. And so we told all of you, if you get our blog, it's free. We make those kind of announcements there, and then we talk about things like that in our monthly connection, that compliance peer group that we do virtually, and we talk about it in our subscription magazine, Banking on BCC. But anyway, back to this. It came out in November. Terrible communication on the part of the government on it being available. You need to check with your with your vendor that you get determinations from, and make sure, one, they're aware of it, and then find out when that's going to start appearing by way of your flood determinations. There is a statement on FEMA's website where you would go and find this new determination that says you should contact your regulator for when you should be utilizing this. But if we use history as our indicator of whether or not we're going to get something from them, you're not going to get anything from your regulator. And so your vendors are likely looking to implement this as soon as they can, provided they're aware of it. So I'd check in with them.
Under HMDA, if an applicant chooses I do not wish to provide for ethnicity, race, and sex, but also selects male, would we mark I do not wish to provide for ethnicity, race, and choose male for sex?
That is correct.
Is it acceptable to have one applicant's demographic information completed based on visual observation because they were in person, even though the second applicant was not in person and their information is marked not taken by visual observation or surname?
Yep, there could be a scenario where that could happen. Absolutely.
For flood insurance, we have a commercial loan secured by a first lien on a residential property. The borrower is now asking for a consumer purpose loan, which will result in a junior lien on the same property. Would the new loan qualify for an exemption from the escrow requirements?
So under the flood insurance rules for escrow accounts, subordinate liens are exempt from escrow accounts.
Under HMDA, is there any guidance that should be followed for what a credit application or credit request should contain?
So there's a lot of different trainings that we do where we throw down the definitions of applications. And one of them I've been doing a lot of these recently is, so I teach TRID. I can't teach TRID without talking about Reg B's definitions and HMDA's definitions. It's tough to talk about HMDA without talking about Reg B's definition and TRID's definition. And you see where I'm going with this. So HMDA, when they most recently rewrote it, they decided to take the HMDA application and define it as follows. Oh, we like what Reg B has, so we'll start there. So Reg B says, generally speaking, an application is an oral or written request for credit. So we start with that. Very broad definition, right? And so we're going to take that plus a property identified. That's HMDA. And so that's the starting point for any HMDA application. It's an oral or written request for credit plus a property identified. Then we have a HMDA application. Now, we have to have a HMDA reportable purpose to go along with that, but in its simplest form, that's what we're looking at from a HMDA application standpoint.
What is the best practice for final closing disclosures and settlement statements from escrow that do not match?
Have a come to Jesus meeting with your third party. This is something that's very common and it's been discussed since day one of TRID. So the responsible party when it comes to the closing disclosure is the bank, the financial institution. A lot of times we allow this to get outsourced to a title company, a settlement agent, an attorney, some third party, which is fine. But if you're going to allow a third party to play in your game, you have to do oversight on them. You have to make sure that they're not providing conflicting information that is confusing and doesn't line up with what you're providing. The thing I hear most is, well, this is our closing disclosure, the banks, and so that's the one we go by for compliance. But the customer got something different from the title company, the attorney, the settlement agent. And if you ever go to court, what's going to be presented before the judge or the jury or whatever is going to be your compliant version, or so you say, as well as this other one. And they have every right to turn on and say, bank, how come you didn't reconcile this? You're the responsible party for this disclosure. There's not supposed to be two things that are supposed to be the same thing but are different. And so the responsibility rests with you to reconcile the issue.
If a flood determination has expired, can we wait until renewal time to pull a new determination?
So I'm trying to read between the lines here. If you're saying, gosh, we're getting ready for a Meyer event, making, increasing, renewing, extending a loan, which triggers a flood determination, and we happen to have one in connection with a prior loan, it has to be less than 7 years, has to be on the form, and the map cannot have changed since the last determination was completed. That 7-year mark is going to go from the date of the Meyer event. And so if it's going to be more than 7 years old, when we get to that Meyer event, you have to do a new determination. If we get to that Meyer event and you're still within the 7-year window, as long as it's on the form and the maps haven't changed, you can rely on that prior determination.
Under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, if we receive written permission from the customer and spouse, are we allowed to pull credit on both of them, even though the loan was made to just one?
Okay, so let me clarify a couple things. The Fair Credit Reporting Act does not require written permission to obtain a credit report outside of employment purposes. Now, it does require us to have a legitimate business purpose. Now, if I heard you right, did you say that the one of the spouses was not going to be on the debt? Was not going to be liable?
Correct.
So my question, if you were sitting in front of me, is, okay, why are we pulling a credit report on somebody that's not going to be liable for the debt? Maybe there's a reason. So the fact that you have written permission in this case is going to make me feel a whole lot better, but I'm still going to question why we're doing it in the first place. But the only time I need written authorization is with employment purposes. All others, I just simply have to have a legitimate business purpose documented in connection with the request. All right, well, folks, I have that we're almost at the top of the hour. I have no idea how many questions we got to, but we have gotten to a lot of them. I've got a couple things that I want to share on behalf of our team before we let you all get back to what it is that you do so well, and that's really serving your customers. I'd like to share with you a couple things here. So let me get my screen share back up here. There we go. All right, so today we did question and answers to your lending compliance questions. Like I said, we do this forum thing 4 times a year. We've got one coming up here in April, will be the next one. This is going to be the Deposit and Operations Compliance Q&A session. There'll be a Bank Secrecy Act one a little bit later on, and then the last one we do each year is a look back on what lies ahead. Here's the super cool thing. You can already begin registering for the compliance forums that we're going to do throughout the year. Here's the thing. I want you to get registered as soon as possible so you can save your seat. There are limitations on the number of people that can come in live at any one event. So we want to make sure that when you do register, you come in live on these things. But you can go ahead and get registered for that as soon as you're able to. What I want to do is thank you for the pre-submitted questions, for the questions that came in live today, to my teammates for helping as we tried to provide you plain English answers to all of these different compliance questions along the way. With that, I have that we are quickly approaching the top of the hour here. We're going to get back to you on that 1071 group that we're looking at putting together. You'll hear from us. The best thing to do is make sure you're subscribed to our free blog. That's how we get a lot of late breaking news out, things that we're thinking about, solutions, things like that. Make sure you're registered for that blog so we can let you know and you can decide whether or not it's something that's right for you. So team, thanks. thanks for helping get the plain English answers in everyone's hands here today. With that, we're going to let these folks get back to what it is that they all do so well, and that's serving their customers. Thanks again.